We carry on with our conference. As we've announced in the second part of the session, all that we've heard in theory already, we will now hear about in practice, how it works in practice from those that are engaged in transmitting and broadcasting parliamentary procedures and have been for years. The introduction will be made by Mr. Panos, Kouanis, Project Component Leader of the Hellenic Parliament.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear MPs, today there is a strong need for the Parliament to reconnect with citizens through various actions. The main target of all such actions is to achieve transparency in a political reality that has a negative effect on the Parliament. One way to reconnect with the public is to take actions that will enable the citizens to reaffirm the fact that the Parliament is well and truly the first legitimate body of democratic debate, and the MPs, and they alone, are primarily entrusted by their constituents with the task of legislating and controlling the government's policies. And, as such, the government, both in its management of daily business and in its definition of future policy, is the first to have an obligation to account to the Parliament, as parliamentary control over governmental actions constitutes an essential element of democracy. In this context, it is evident that however the three functions of a Parliament, meaning the legislative, the representative and the oversight, are weighted, their effective performance requires open communication between the parliamentary bodies and the citizens. Open communication is not merely a way to pass the message of the activities of the Parliament, but represents a new way of conceptualizing and conducting core parliamentary roles. As such, parliaments have to develop communication strategies that will enable them to educate and inform citizens about parliamentary affairs and the work of parliamentary committees, and to encourage greater public engagement in representative democracy. A communication plan for Parliament, thus, today serves a dual purpose: to increase public understanding of and increase public engagement in parliamentary operations. In this context now, consideration should be given to the various ways in which the Parliament can inform and dialogue with the public, and to the role which the media can play, as their influence on a Parliament that is in direct touch with public opinion and on a government anxious to explain and to obtain the population's support and participation is both elementary and normal. The problem, though, is that today parliaments are confronted with many challenges in engaging with the media, as there is less media coverage of the parliamentary proceedings from both public and private television stations, and there are competing priorities in the fundamental issue of who decides what is reported or shown. The media has an insatiable appetite for information which sells well and is typically instantaneous, sensational and ephemeral. On top of that, the MPs tend to see media opportunities politically, according to party and other more subjective interests. As such, the Parliament has to target opportunities to present a positive image of proceedings and the institution to help overcome public apathy, disenchantment, dissatisfaction or ignorance. For a Parliament, traditional advertising and marketing evaluations, such as, for example, viewing ratings in television, have little relevance. What is more important is community outreach. Since then, communication passes virtually exclusively via the media, there is a strong need to create direct channels of communication between the public and the Parliament. One of the strongest direct channels of communication for the Parliament is television and web broadcasting. Why? because it gives the public direct access to information. Television dramatically extends the ability of the citizens to actually watch and listen as laws and policies are made, from the relative handful of people who can sit in the Parliament's public galleries to virtually the entire nation. People are therefore better able to assess for themselves the performance of their elected Parliament and government. The citizen becomes more than a simple spectator, and the journalist is no longer the sole analyst of the parliamentary news. As such, television becomes a vital tool for reconciling society with democracy. The mission, therefore, of a TV channel dedicated to broadcasting the Parliament is to improve people's perception of politics and politicians by creating a service that provides a full, fair and accurate account of proceedings and the political process, raw and unedited, an open forum which reflects the social and political diversity of the respective country, with access to information for all. In this context, the main objectives of the channel are to present parliamentary work, unedited and uninterrupted, without any commentary, the plenary sessions, the committees, etc., and explain parliamentary work to the public in a clearly understandable manner and clarify the political issues, jargon and tactics. The size, structure, organization and budget of the channels differentiates according to country-specific peculiarities, such as the political and parliamentary system, whether it's unicameral or bicameral, the size and composition of the population, the amount of parliamentary work in the plenary and the committees, and many other issues. But in general, the most important issues related to operations are who and how operates and controls the channel. Is it the Parliament? It has to have independent, it has to be independent from government control. Who controls the material produced and broadcasted, the program, whether it's strictly parliamentary or there is something else also like documentaries, parliamentary news, European news, etc. Any other additional services such as web TV, radio, any kind of sponsorship and connection with local communities and youth, access to people with disabilities, and finally the budget, which budget also depends on infrastructure and program content. Of course, this is what the budget defines also what there's going to be as programming. For successful broadcast of the parliamentary proceedings and related programs, the most important issues to consider are, of course, infrastructure, technology, studios, the staff. If it's only the plenary sessions, then we're talking about mainly technicians. If we're talking about also parliamentary news and other kind of programs, we need journalists. The rules of coverage, which is basically the guidelines of electronic coverage, camera language, etc. A very good example of camera language is basically BBC Parliament, which has a very, very clear and strict rules of coverage. Another thing is preparing and educating the MPs, because once you are on TV and everybody watches you, if you do something or you have a certain something happens, this is something that it can be exploited by someone else. So the conduct is very, very, very important. And some other issues such as advertising. For example, what we call in marketing indirect advertising. Like for example, now you have this bottle here. This is it called indirect advertising. It's it's like I'm making a commercial now because it's next to me and we are being broadcasted on web. Another important thing is that the TV stations are commercial free. For example, in France, this is part of their law, portant création de la chaîne parlementaire, which you're going to talk about. Now, if the channel decides that it will include news and political talk shows, as is the case of for example, of France, Germany and Greece, And then they must define content, which ensures political neutrality. All the political parties will have to be represented equally. The infrastructure, as I said, the studios, etc., and journalists, which they have to be experienced and impartial. And of course, something that is very important is European content, all EU-related issues, to present the European institutions, European news, etc. As television is a 24/7 job, and the works of the Parliament are not enough to cover the whole program, the TV station may decide to enrich the program in order also to avoid the constant repetition or the card, as is common practice, like for example with many TV stations that don't have any other kind of program, like is in Spain or Portugal, etc. In such an endeavor, the core of the program should be related to the broader role of the Parliament, basically culture. So it could focus on politics, history, sciences, culture, education, the environment. The channel may decide to create original programming, in-house productions, or proceed with program acquisitions from other TV stations, documentaries and stuff like that. In any case, what we must always have in mind is the end receiver, the target audience of such a TV channel. As it is a public service, it is theoretically targeted towards all the citizens. And it doesn't fall into the typical practices of distribution, marketing, and advertising evaluation, what we call ratings or market share, etc. In practice, it is targeted to a niche market, as the viewer profile of such a channel is very narrow. It is mostly watched by people already committed to a strong interest in politics, although all the research that there is available shows that the higher the educational level, the more they watch parliamentary news. And of course, the economic crisis in Europe and in many countries actually, because many people are interested in the laws passed in the parliament, they tend to watch more the parliamentary news and parliamentary sessions. Now, how can we get market penetration? How can we reach a broader audience? Especially since the Parliament must find new participative actions, because public opinion is no longer satisfied with one-way communication in which only the voices of politicians and journalists would be heard. By creating a more attractive package, by enriching the service, by trying to enlarge viewership. This may happen with the use of technology, for example, new media, digital television, web television, the exploitation of the audiovisual archives, like for example on demand on the internet, by introducing a radio station. There are several countries that have radio stations like in Australia and in the United States, and European cooperation. One example is the exchange of programs between respective parliamentary or public channels. Today, public pressure on parliaments is greater than ever. By adopting such an initiative, the Parliament eventually will enforce its way into becoming what it should be in the first place, a forum for the articulation of public opinion. Thank you very much.
We would like to thank Mr. Kouanis. You heard, like he emphasized, parliaments today faced with series of challenges, especially from the perspective of media follow-up of work and activities of parliament. It is, of course, possible to overcome these challenges. There are ways, but maybe it is best to hear how to overcome these challenges and how all this can function directly from the experience of Greek Parliament, from Mr.Andreas Koskinidis. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, nowadays, considering that we are facing a global economic crisis with significant impact on people's lives, it is important to examine ways that could contribute in the upgrading of the Parliament as a public institution and in the strengthening of the connection between Parliament and civil society. In modern democracies, the Parliament is perceived as the most important representative institution and fulfills functions of crucial importance. The role of citizens in a democracy is not exhausted with the election of their representatives. Citizens need to have access to the Parliament, need to be informed about the process of the parliamentary work, need to be engaged to the parliamentary procedures, need to feel that their voice can be heard during the policy-making process. From their part, the parliamentary institutions have to adopt all the necessary techniques and procedures in order to respond to the requests of the civil society. Thus, the national parliaments should be influenced by principles that coincide to an advanced level of democratic governance. Those principles are representation, which means that the Parliament should ensure social and political representation of the diversity of the people and equal opportunities and protections for all its members. Transparency, which means that the Parliament should be open to the nation through a variety of means and transparent in the conduct of its procedures. Accessibility, meaning that the Parliament should enhance the involvement of the public either as individuals or as associations of citizens. And accountability, which means that the members of the Parliament must be accountable to the electorate for their performance in the implementation of their duties, for their integrity and their independence. And effectiveness, which means that the organization of parliamentary work should be in accordance with the above democratic values, and the performance of legislative and oversight functions must serve the needs of the people. All of the 5 principles mentioned above correspond to the request of the civil society for democratic governance. But the principle of transparency seems to have a special interest since it constitutes a precondition for the fulfillment of the other 4. Lack of transparency in the parliamentary work would obviously affect the quality and the essence of the parliamentary output. But the most important is that lack of transparency abolishes at once any kind of relationship and interaction, any perspective of participation and engagement on behalf of the civil society. Unfortunately, the phenomenon of competitiveness between the executive and the legislative power is quite common around the world. The government usually dominates the parliament, depriving it from the opportunity to exercise in the adequate way its constitutional role. This leads people to believe that nothing important happens in the Parliament, or that what is happening there is nothing but a typical procedure that will end by offering approval to the governmental will. Under this circumstance, the parliamentary institution progressively loses its reliability and respect. The acceptance of this belief should motivate immediate actions on behalf of the parliamentary institution. The parliaments need to put under light the entity of the spectrum of their institutional communication. During this procedure, the improvement of transparency is a matter of significant importance. In these terms, transparency means the opening of all the parliamentary structures to the civil society in order not only to communicate the information produced in the Parliament, but also to respond to citizens' requests for more and reliable information. The diffusion of the information produced within the Parliament engages a wide range of means and activities and tends to become a very challenging procedure. Television, radio, press, websites, blogs, social media constitute the public's main sources of information about the Parliament. But even if we live in the era of technology, where the information travels faster than ever, does that guarantee its quality? The information transmitted by the above means of communication is just transferred from the source to the public, or in some cases is filtered and modified. And consequently, the image that people have for their parliament corresponds to the actual situation of the public institution, or it is insufficient and wrong. These and many other relevant questions may be raised reflecting the relationship between the media and the parliament and how this parliament affects the formation of public opinion. And how this relationship affects the formation of public opinion. Within this general framework, the discussion on parliamentary broadcasting, which started somewhere in the late 70s, remains always valid and important. The introduction of the camera in the plenary session and the committee meetings may be considered as a decisive step in the procedure of parliamentary transparency. Of course, since the very beginning, some thoughts on possible dangers from the invasion of the camera in the parliamentary premises were raised. Is television the adequate means to promote the role of the Parliament? Could the continuous presence of the camera have negative effects on the nature of the parliamentary work? On one hand, there is the opinion that the nature of the television is incompatible with the essence of democracy because it could transform the political information to commercial product addressed to viewers/consumers without any intention to promote their critical thinking. On the other hand, there is the opinion that television can contribute in the modernization of the democratic political institutions because the information transmitted through it can reach people from all the social levels, including the less privileged, who under other circumstances would remain uninformed. In any case, the answer to the skepticism concerning the adequacy of television in the promotion of the parliamentary institution is that the danger is not hidden inside the nature of the means, but obviously can be found in the way of its use. The parliamentary work as a television product cannot be by its nature attractive to the majority of the population, even if in some parliaments there have been amendments in the rules of procedures, for example in the duration of the speeches. Consequently, the broadcast of parliamentary procedures is addressed to specific target groups each time, with the exception of occasions where the subject discussed in the Parliament is of crucial importance and thus attracts big audiences. So, the first question that has to be answered is what is worth to be broadcasted, what is not, and how? In fact, this question has not only one answer. Some believe that the broadcast of the parliamentary procedures must be selective, partial, and presented in a journalistic way. Others insist that the coverage of the parliamentary work has to be continuous and live from the beginning to the end of the procedure. The expression of those two contradictory opinions reflects the differentiation of purpose between the media and the parliament. On the one side, the media, having in mind that the parliamentary procedures are boring for the majority of the viewers, promotes the presentation of the audiovisual material from a journalistic perspective in order to make it more interesting and attractive. From this point of view, the political agenda is being posed by the media with the risk of some facts, along with some less popular MPs, to remain in the shadow. On the other hand, the side of the public institution, it is believed that the broadcast of the parliamentary procedures must be live, continuous and complete, because in this way the citizens can obtain a genuine image of how the Parliament works and how the decisions that affect their lives are taken. In such a way of covering the parliamentary work, the citizens can form an opinion for their representatives based on the way they exercise their duties within the parliamentary procedures they participate in. Additionally, in this way, it is guaranteed that there will be a fair presentation of all the MPs who participate in a debate or discussion, always in accordance with the rules of parliamentary procedures. In any case, both of the above opinions seem to have strong assets in the discussion concerning the openness of the parliamentary institution to the civil society. Every year, in many countries, take place researches that investigate the range of parliamentary news within the political news and the media. Unfortunately, in most researches, the conclusion is that the reference of the media concerning the Parliament and its work is declining. This fact underestimates its role, since Parliament remains the public institution that creates the political agenda, given that in democracies all the decisions are taken, or at least have to be taken, in the national assemblies. The above acceptance leads to the following question. Should parliaments contribute to the creation of their own image by participating with their own means in a field where the media, by tradition, have the dominant role? The answer is definitely yes. When the parliament can manage and transmit its information, this leads to an obvious dual profit. It makes easier the access of the journalists in the parliamentary information, and it offers the citizens the possibility to get the information directly from the source. For this reason, many parliaments, taking advantage of the opportunities that technological progress offers, create new structures in order to become the key players in the diffusion of the parliamentary information and to find ways to communicate with the citizens in a more direct and effective way. Drafting of modern and inspired websites, creation of social media accounts, establishment of parliamentary television channels are among the initiatives that modern parliaments take in order to improve their communication, strengthen transparency on parliamentary work, and become accountable to the civil society. What has to be mentioned is that these initiatives do not intend to substitute or compete with the existing media, but to function as a complementary source of information by providing full and unedited coverage of the procedures and activities that take place within the parliamentary institution. In this way, citizens have direct access to the parliamentary information and to details that may not be included in the traditional coverage by the media, and so on, they become able to create opinion on their own. For many years, the national public broadcasters, mostly, transmitted occasionally the parliamentary proceedings. Since the late 20th century, the majority of the parliaments in Europe and many around the world offer to citizens the opportunity to have access to the audiovisual primary material of parliamentary proceedings through a variety of means. Satellites, cable television, digital terrestrial broadcasting and broadband internet constitute adequate ways of transmitting the parliamentary work. In the European Union, most of the national parliaments, including the European Parliament, offer through their official websites a range of audiovisual services that includes from simple live streaming access to the plenary sessions to services of a well-organized web television which broadcasts either live or as video on demand all the parliamentary work in the plenary and the committees. A step further has been made due to the establishment of special channels dedicated to follow the parliamentary work, either by just transmitting the entity of the parliamentary procedures or by offering a complete informative package on the parliamentary output. The parliamentary channels differ from country to country because they have to be adapted to each country's specific situation and political system. A common characteristic of the parliamentary channels is their non-profit status. Besides that, their ownership and funding are various and different. In the European Union, many of the parliamentary channels are owned and function under the direct supervision of the parliament. Such examples are Europarl TV, the European Parliament TV, the TV channel that covers the European Parliament, LCP1 and Public Sénat in France, the two channels that cover the two legislative bodies of France, Bundestag TV in Germany, Hellenic Parliament Television, Houses of the Oriektas channel, this is a channel which covers the procedures of the two legislative bodies of Ireland, Canal Parlamento and TV Senado in Spain, the same, also in Italy, Camera TV and Senato TV, Folketinget TV in Denmark, Chamber TV in Luxembourg, and RTV Canal Parlamento in Portugal. In some other cases, the parliamentary channels belong to the national public broadcasters, or, as in the case of Hungary, to a private media group. Some indicative examples are those of Phoenix in Germany, which belongs to the public broadcasters ARD and ZDF, Rai Parlamento in Italy, NPO Politik in the Netherlands, RTV3 in Slovenia, and TVP Parliament in Poland, which constitute branches of public broadcasters. BBC Parliament is a unique case in the European Union since the parliamentary coverage is organized by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit, which is owned by the major broadcasting companies. So we are talking here about a model of cooperation between public and private sector for the offer of a public service. Also, significant examples of parliamentary channels can be found all around the world, as in the USA with the cable satellite public affairs network, in Canada with the cable public affairs channel, and in Australia with the Australian Public Affairs channel. In these countries, the public service of parliamentary broadcasting is in cable television companies' hands. Since in all the above examples, the funding, partial or as a whole, is public, it is significant to mention that in the case of C-SPAN, the whole funding comes from the cable TV subscribers' fee. Most of the above-mentioned channels transmit their program through web television, cable television, and via satellite, becoming thus accessible to a satisfactory amount of viewers. Of course, there are examples like in the UK, France, Greece, Portugal, Italy, etc., where the signal of the parliamentary channel is also either analog, in Greece for example, or digital terrestrial, making this way the parliament accessible to more viewers. Obviously, the spread of digital terrestrial television gives definite solution to the problem of available frequencies. Another point of crucial importance is the programming policy and the content of the parliamentary channel. Many of the parliamentary channels, besides the broadcasting of the parliamentary procedures, enrich their programs with talk shows, news bulletins, informative emissions, etc., in their effort to offer concrete and spherical information to the public. Channels like LCP and Public Sénat, BBC Parliament, and others have emissions and programs dedicated to books, history, civilization. Also, channels like Phoenix and the Hellenic Parliament Television, in addition to the above, include in their programs documentaries, classical music and movies. Of course, there are also parliamentary channels, like those in Ireland and Luxembourg, that restrict their activity to the broadcasting of the parliamentary work only. Special reference needs to be done for the web television of the European Parliament, which split its program in 3 groups which target different audiences in an effort to provide an overview of the EU Parliament's role and activity. Those groups are Parliament News, Youth Parliament and Discover Parliament. Finishing this brief reference on the general profile and status of parliamentary channels in the European Union, what has to be mentioned is that the cost of a parliamentary channel varies and depends on the range of the activities of the channel, the kind of infrastructure needed in order to support the coverage of these activities, and the number of human resources needed in order to fulfill its mission. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that all the EU parliaments, through the national broadcasters, through cooperation with cable television and private television networks, through the establishment of their own television infrastructures, the fact that all those parliaments seek to broadcast their work proves that the provision of direct access to the parliamentary procedures is considered a very important action in the strengthening of institutional transparency. Of course, since broadcasting Parliament has a significant or less significant cost, requiring coverage from public resources most of the times, there will always be criticism on the need of relevant actions. So the answer to this criticism could be that any investment in the direction of closing the gap between citizens and Parliament and bringing them closer constitutes an investment for the quality of democracy, and the profit of such an investment is invaluable. Thank you very much.
Zahvaljujem gospodinu Koskinidis. Čuli smo od njega, spomenuo je BBC.
Thank you, Mr. Koskinidis. He mentioned the BBC Parliament from the UK, and owing to this conference, we have an opportunity that through the presentation of control of work of BBC, of UK Parliament, to get acquainted with the work of this parliamentary channel. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My apologies to your excellent translators, but I'm going to go off-piste from the script a little bit at this stage. Can I just first of all get a sense, please, of who's in the audience? Are there any MPs here now, or are the members all in their plenary session? Are there any members here? So we're... One lady. 2. Fantastic. That's wonderful. And the rest, civil society, would you, broadly speaking, do we think that... Great, thank you. I want to just change the language of this discussion a little from what you've heard so far. And can I check, am I being picked up sufficiently by the microphone if I stand here, or do I need to sit back down again? You can hear? You're okay. I want to change the language a little bit, because the language we've heard throughout the presentations this morning has been in terms of citizens, and I never talk about citizens. Actually, we don't have them in the UK. We have subjects because we have a monarchy, but that's another story. So I don't think in terms of citizens. I think in terms of viewers and listeners. I don't think in terms of outreach. There's a parliamentary department for outreach. I don't do outreach, but I do think in terms of viewing and listening figures. I'm not thinking in terms of I don't think this works as a process, as a transfer of know-how, which is one of our speakers talked about at the start. I think this is a sharing of experience. And above all, rather than thinking in terms of laws, media laws and structures, which our opening speakers talked about, I think this is really all about political and broadcasting culture. It's about culture, about how we think and our assumptions and our personal histories and the histories of our organisations, and how that all brings to bear on how we think and how we behave and what we do in terms of what we cover as journalists and how we cover it. There are two real fundamental starting points, two things that are really important to bear in mind as to whether any of this parliamentary journalism and broadcasting can be made to work. And it's to do with the way parliaments behave. And the first is this question. In a parliament, are there two points of view that have pretty much equal space, one proposing, one opposing? I'm not talking about the formality of government and opposition, because nearly every system, there are exceptions, even in the democratic world, but nearly every system has a formal government and a formal opposition. I don't really mean that. What I mean is that in normal debate, is there really opportunity for two sides to have a go at each other? And you see that in a most sort of dramatic fashion each week in the event that takes place in about an hour's time in the House of Commons in Prime Minister's Question Time, where in a very rowdy way the two sides face off against each other and have a go at each other. But it doesn't have to be rowdy. But what you are looking for in debate is the possibility of clear opposition, and the same in committee hearings as well. Does the government find itself subject to a meaningful critique of its actions? Does it have to explain itself? So that's one precondition for really any of this work to be of interest. The other, I would say, is this. Can the debate that takes place in Parliament, that takes place in committees, can it make a difference? Is there a realistic possibility that what gets said in a debate and what gets said in a hearing will make any difference at all to what the government then does? Can the government be persuaded to change its mind, change its direction? Is there a realistic prospect that a debate can lead to a vote which leads to something that you haven't previously expected to happen? Now, without those two political preconditions, our work as journalists covering Parliament and making it interesting is going to be very, very challenging. So I just put that out there first, before we talk about how the broadcasting works. There are different kinds of broadcasting of Parliament, and they're not in opposition to each other. They are not alternatives. You must choose one or another. There is pure access. There is mediated access with plenty of journalism around it. And then there's the political reporting, which uses that which takes place in Parliament as part of the political programmes and news reports. The BBC does all of these things, and all of those things happen within my area of output. So I just want to, first of all, make the point that pure access is actually really quite hard to find. People think it's there, pure, but it's not really. So I'll give you an example. The report, the official report of Parliament is called, in the UK, is called Hansard. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the idea of Hansard as a direct, verbatim account of what's said in Parliament. And you'd think, well, that's the purest form of access there is. Published the next day in print form, available online within a few hours. But, and it's done by Parliament, not by the BBC. But Hansard has an editor. Well, why would it need an editor if it's just what the MPs said? But, of course, rather wittily, Hansard was once presented to me as a verbatim account of what the members of Parliament meant to say. So even Hansard is not a pure form of access, it is an edited version. And I just want to, very, very briefly, I want to show you on the screen the nearest that we come to access, which is something called Democracy Live. It's available anywhere. It's up to 8 streams of live output. And you'd think that this is pure access, but I want to just discuss it. I'll just take a second. I'll go to the microphone. So just switching on to here, I just want to show you, this is what the site looks like at the moment. And I might need to hit refresh if I can find that button. You need help from us? Yeah, I just need, where's the refresh button? I'm not familiar with this, sorry, I thought it would come up. What does that do? Ooh, I've got it. Yay. Okay, good. Okay. So, right, here goes. So there are 8 video panels there, of which currently 4 are live. So we're live from the Northern Ireland Assembly, the top right, Welsh Assembly, Scottish Parliament, and then below there's a second chamber of the House of Commons called Westminster Hall, which I'm just moving the cursor to there. During the course of the morning, the other 3 or 4 of the others will light up and go live as we go to Prime Minister's questions and so on. So that's access, isn't it? That's pretty much pure access, except look what's lurking on the right-hand side of the screen. You've got a roundup of the week with highlights. You've got watch stroke listen. Again, here we've chosen some of the most interesting debates and hearings. Further down, well, we've chosen under catch-up the most important hearings and so on. We've got political stories here. We've got our expert blog comment there from Mark Darcy, our parliamentary correspondent, and so on. So even in its purest form of access, what the broadcasters do, it isn't just access. There's quite a lot of journalism there too. I'll go back to my proper place now. Thank you for bearing with me. And then when we get to the television channel, yes, we're live, uninterrupted, on the House of Commons, just in a few minutes. But we add to the screen commentary about explanation of what the members of Parliament are talking about. I choose which chamber we go to live, or which hearing we do live, which hearings we repeat in the evening, what we give prominence to. The channel is made up of this uninterrupted coverage and highlights and political programmes which come from the rest of the BBC and some programmes that we make ourselves, especially in the weekend schedules. So there's no real... You can have a TV channel which just sort of switches on at the start of the day and goes to the chamber live and switches off at the end, and that's how BBC Parliament started. But it's frankly not much of a channel, and it's not much of a watch. Briefly, we also do 2 daily half-hour radio programmes, which go on the main speech network. And I do want to, let's just talk about them for a moment. They're analytical programmes. There's 5 or 6 most important parliamentary stories of the day. Easily the biggest audience to anything that we do that's dedicated to parliamentary coverage is the audience to those radio programmes. And radio mustn't be forgotten about in this excitement. I'm a TV person, so I'm excited about television. But in the excitement about doing television coverage and online, let's not forget the value and the importance of radio. 500,000 people tune in to our radio programme last night, 11:30 in the evening, and we'll tune in again tonight. 500,000 are listening for at least 15 minutes. It has the highest share of the audience of any news and current affairs programme the BBC makes on weekday radio. Extraordinarily strong figures. And for a 5-minute slot that we show in the morning, that we play in the morning at 6:45 in the morning, the average audience at that time of day to that programme is around 2.5 million, 2.6 million. Huge, huge audiences still to radio. And the audience, people tend to think of it as being a niche audience because it's a niche or specialist piece of output. But it isn't. The general audience, we have quite good data on who our audience is. I think the audience to the website I've shown you, probably is quite niche. It's NGOs, it's civil society, it's people concerned with lawmaking, use that very heavily. But to the television channel, we know quite a lot about the audience. In its social demographic, it is exactly matches the demographic of the whole country. So the number of people who are wealthy and the number of people who are poor who are watching is exactly the same as that for the whole population. What's different about it is two things are really quite remarkable. And they may be linked. But the first is the gender gap. It's about 3 men to every 1 woman who's watching BBC Parliament. And the other thing that's remarkable is the age profile. Because Parliament is at its most interesting during the day, then that's who the audience is we get, people watching in daytime. Well, who's got the time to sit there watching the television all through the day? And it's older people, it's unemployed people, it's retired people, semi-retired people. So our age profile for the audience is 55 plus, very, very strongly. These are also the same people who go out and vote. So there is a correlation between the two things there. So there's quite interesting things that we know about the audience, and we pick up a different audience according to the medium. So the audience for the radio programmes that I talked about, that channel, Radio 4, BBC Radio 4, has more women listening to it than men. So the gender gap goes the other way for the radio broadcasts. So really quite interesting stuff there about who's likely to watch or listen to this dedicated, specialist parliamentary coverage. Now, I'm going to behave myself now, sit down and give the translators a break and go back to the script that I gave them. So here goes. I think that there's a really interesting question about, which has already been touched upon, about who's in charge of this kind of journalism. Now, I need to explain, first of all, BBC Parliament and all my output is paid for out of a compulsory tax, which is a taxation on the ownership of television receiving equipment. It's called the licence fee. But the BBC is independent of government and it's independent of Parliament. There's only one post in the BBC, well, it's outside the BBC, the chair of the regulatory body, the BBC Trust, which is appointed, a direct appointment by government, one post. The licence fee is granted to the BBC to pay for all its work, including the World Service, by Parliament. But I do not take my instructions from anyone in Parliament, not ever. So now let's look at what the problem is, and we've already started to talk about it. You can't do this kind of broadcasting without some form of public subsidy. There is no model, except possibly that of C-SPAN in the States, which does not require a fairly high level of direct or indirect support. Advertising certainly won't do it. C-SPAN would probably argue with what I've just said because it is a levy on cable subscribers, but it's kind of so institutionalized, it's a fairly hefty form of indirect support. I think it could be argued. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that. In most countries, in the majority of countries, Parliament itself has taken on the role of being provider, not just filming the proceedings of Parliament, as they do in the UK, but actually of also then providing these TV and online services directly. Now, there are some quite interesting and good outcomes that can come from this. There should be a lot of help with facilities and provision of advance information if Parliament's taking responsibility for it. And in the case of the Irish Channel, which the Irish Parliament is about to launch, well, the plan there, the Speaker's plan, when I last spoke to him on this, was that he was going to hope to change the sitting times of committees to create a better schedule for the channel. Absolutely amazing. What wonderful foresight. But I would say that straight away, even with the most neutral sounding TV schedule, there are difficulties with this model. Most parliamentary offices are extremely uncomfortable with the idea that they will take editorial decisions, such as choosing which committees are filmed and which are given prominence. And the worst thing would be if the audience came to believe that it was political parties themselves or the government who were deciding what they saw of Parliament and how it was reported. Day by day, I take many decisions, choosing which chamber we show live, editing programmes of analysis and discussion, which would sit very uncomfortably in the offices of even the most serenely impartial parliamentary department. Do I show a committee live from Westminster, or one from the devolved Parliament, say the Scottish Parliament? Do I lead in our programmes or with the hearing in which the government minister took a battering from his opponents, or do I lead with a big government announcement, and so on? The examples just multiply. Well, there's no single solution to all of these problems, and it certainly wouldn't make any sense at all for me to wander around the world saying, well, there's only one model that works, and it's the BBC model, and here it is. Each country has a different regulatory and market framework, a different broadcasting and political culture, the thing that I started with. So what I'm saying is that these are the questions you need to be asking, questions of principle, before dashing off into setting up new services which you hope and believe will satisfy the needs of the audience. Those needs are for impartial, fair, honest coverage. And at the same time, you're trying to make this watchable and listenable to and readable. And we won't underestimate how difficult that is. There's a famous, and I'll stop in a moment, there's a famous joke attributed to Otto von Bismarck, the German Chancellor. It's attributed to him. I don't think there's any real evidence he actually ever said this. The joke goes that he says that making laws is like making sausages, something that it's better not to see done. So the questions I leave you with are: who pays? Who do you trust? Who do you trust to provide these services? Because using the word access tends to imply that this is simple or easy, and it's not. These are complex journalistic and editorial decisions at pretty much every stage of the process. Thank you very much.
Now, what model of work is being effectuated in France? We are going to find out through the presentation of Ms.Virginie Nicolle and presentation of LCB Assemblee Nationale in France. Turn on the microphone, please. The interpreters don't hear.
L'opinion. Les problèmes, il faut les voir en face. Il est temps aussi de changer de politique et que vous découvriez le courage politique. Il ne s'agit pas d'avoir peur. Ça
n'a rien de réactionnaire. Au contraire, c'est le progrès.
Celle qui perd.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's just a glimpse of LCP, la chaîne parlementaire. I am Virginie Nicolle. I am in charge of communication for the French Parliamentary Channel. I've been working for 9 years with LCP. I'm pleased today to present the specific model, the specific organization in France. For introduction, so to put LCP in context, LCP is an abbreviation of La Chaîne Parlementaire. We can say that in France, the TV coverage of parliamentary works reflects the parliamentary institutions with bicameralism. Indeed, in France, we have got two independent parliamentary identities, one for each assembly. LCP, representing the National Assembly and following the works of MPs, and Public Sénat, representing the Senate and following the works of MPs. Senators, excuse me. These two identities share the same channels and share equally the broadcasting time, with 8 air changes per day. So I will talk more specifically about LCP. LCP has got 3 main references. It's parliamentary, of course, but political and civic. We are going to see this position later in its programming. And finally, LCP is broadcasted in cable, satellite, but mainly on DTTV. And DTTV represents a real opportunity for LCP to reach a whole household in France. Now we can talk about the legal organization. LCP was created by a law in 1999. The two French assemblies constituting the French Parliamentary Channel, la chaîne parlementaire. This term covers 2 identities I've already talked about, LCP and Public Sénat. And they both have the same core mission, is to broadcast their parliamentary works, of course, but propose quite diversified grids. I will focus on LCP organization. LCP has only got one shareholder, the National Assembly. And about the legal disposition, LCP has a board of members representing each political group, a chairman, appointed for 3 years by the Assembly Board. Currently, LCP is directed by Gérard Leclerc, who was appointed in 2009 and re-elected in 2012. And it's important to say that LCP is only financed by the budget allocated by the National Assembly, without any commercial advertising. I just would like, to talk about the main missions of LCP. The 3 main missions. The first one consists in presenting parliamentary works, of course, including live debates that take place at Parliament, and also live debates of the different internal committees, for example, social affairs, international affairs, ecological affairs, and specific auditions, for example, when there is a parliamentary inquiry. The second mission is to explaining and decrypting the parliamentary debates with a selection of programs, because the debates are not always easily comprehended. So it's necessary often to explain the different issues of the subject in order to target the larger public. And the third mission is to providing political, educational and civic programs to attract a varied audience. We are going to talk about different characteristics of la chaîne parlementaire. The first one is the hearing. The hearing. The second. Thank you. The hearing. About the hearing, first of all, at its beginnings, LCP was only airing on cable and satellite. The French law stipulates that all cable and satellite networks have to carry the public and parliamentary channels in France. And it's only in 2005 that LCP was broadcasted on free DTTV. This new airing on DTTV gave a new birth, or we used to say that it's a second birth for LCP, because it targets a much larger public than just by cable and satellite. Currently in France, DTTV proposed 25 channels, and LCP is placed on channel 13. But it's important to add that LCP is also available since 2007 on a specific on internet and ADSL, with a specific channel that gives 24 hours a day coverage. Overall, LCP can be received by 58.5 million potential viewers. About the audience and the progression with the different broadcasts, LCP is measured by an institute, Digitime, who measures the audience only on ADSL box, around 2 million ADSL boxes. You can see that, you can see different and the progression of the audience. In March 2003, before the launching of DTTV in France, LCP counted 560,000 viewers. In 2006, 1 year after the launching of DTTV, LCP reached 7 million viewers, and currently in 2014 we are at 50 million. To comment a little bit about these figures, of course the audience depends on political and parliamentary news. Also the audience is an ambition, of course, but not an obsession for LCP. Because some programming choices are done on a civic interest. LCP is often the only TV opportunity for the public to follow the debate in the National Assembly. So audience, it's important, but it's not an obsession. We make different choice. Yes, about next, the most important aspect of the existence of the channel, it's the budget. As I said before, our budget is approved by the Assembly Board and the Assembly Chairman. It's important to precise that LCP has got the smallest budget among the channels on DTTV. Its budget is pretty stable. In 2008, the budget was 14 million euros, and currently in 2014, 60.6 million euros. If we talked about the budget breakdown, around 60% of the budget is devoted to programs comprised of internal production for 50% and purchasing program for 10%. The airing, it's a big cost. On DTTV represents 27%, and the remaining 8% around goes to overheads and other additional costs like communication. About the staff, LCP is of course a team made up of mostly young and very motivated people. We now have 60 permanent staff, including newsroom with 30%, 25 to 30%, programs 6, production and technical 20, and we also have many freelancers, for example reporters, journalists, cameraman and editor, representing the equivalent of 10 full-time employees. Yes, here you can see a glimpse of the organization chart with Gérard Leclerc in chairman, general secretary and program director, broadcasting director, development and technical director, production director, managing, etc., documentary purchases, and digital manager. About the partners, we also have a lot of external partners, such as institutions, ministries, political science schools, other broadcasting operators, of course, the French PSB, local TVs, parliamentary channels abroad, radio, newspapers, magazines, polling institutes and research company, and etc. All these partners offer to LCP editorial contents and communication spaces. Yes, about database, internet. This is an area that has grown enormously, and LCP attaches great importance to internet and social networks. In our internet site, we can see the 2 channels, DTTV Broadcasting and the full-time channel 24 hours a day. We can find information about programs, of course, a free video on demand or catch-up, blog and forums. LCP is also present on social networks, Facebook or on Twitter, for example, to reach the new generation and to reach as many people. Yeah. About values, LCP is fundamentally a civic channel who has many educational and civic programs. About the civic aspect, since June 2007, LCP is the first DTTV channel offering subtitle programs for the hearing impaired people, for example. It's a civic point important for us. About the values that guides LCP, trust is the foundation of the channel. We value independence, pluralism, impartiality and honesty. As mentioned before, we are editorially independent and we always try to treat information with neutrality and objectivity. Yes, about the programs now, as I said, we can safely move to the front part, if I may say. I will describe our program, our grid. LCP broadcasted 4,400 hours program for a year, including 62 parliamentary programs, among which we can find live parliamentary works and internal programs aiming to explain the main issues of the parliamentary work, to enable debates between deputies, experts and citizens with interactivity. We have got a magazine in the evening with interactivity where citizens can directly interpret the deputies with webcam or with forum. It's important to add this, their voice, or to follow MPs on their local work, on their mission abroad. It's a part of the parliamentary programs, and 38% of the grid of non-specific parliamentary programs, including programs about the life of the political parties, for example, conventions, or live retransmissions of national, European or international political events. We cover the annual convention of each political party and broadcast the most important speeches given by the French president. In this part of non-specific parliamentary programs, we can find political, social, cultural magazine aiming to help understand the society evolution or main geopolitical changes. Indeed, LCP offers many magazines to talk about politics differently. A magazine on diversity, mobility, for example, a program film in a cafe in the suburbs around Paris with young reporters. We broadcast a short magazine of a short musical program which name is Rock and Roll, based on the political or social commitment singers. We multiplicate the program and the magazine to talk to politics differently in our grid. Beyond magazine and debates, LCP also diffuse documentaries and films, follow always by debates with deputies, journalists, experts. We podcast around or co-produce 100 documentaries and 10 films annually. Obviously, we don't propose Hollywood blockbuster, of course, but movies with political or social contents. To conclude, LCP wants to give all the understanding keys to the viewers to make accessible the parliamentary and political matters at all. And I hope that I've given you a glimpse of LCP and the grid. That's all.
Thank you, Ms.Virginie Nicolle. We'd like to open our Q&A session now. Perhaps, there's a question there. Please switch on your microphone. My name is Bojan Brkic. I am the Deputy Editor-in-Chief for Radio Television Serbia. Mr. Kouanis said that one would need to pay attention and make sure that unless there were no direct broadcasts from the Parliament, but the reporting would be limited to political programs prepared by journalists on how the Parliament works, that there is a danger that the journalists might decide the political agenda and decide what the priorities are. But then Mr. Knowles said something completely different, that the journalists should produce programs about the Parliament in order to make them more watchable and more understandable for people, because people are not able to follow everything that goes on in the Parliament. So this is a question for both of them. What would be the ideal middle ground between these two attitudes, where both issues need to be contemplated in depth?
Then I can see. Hi. Well, what I'm trying to argue for here is doing all of this. That there isn't an argument that says that political coverage is what you need and you don't have to have access, nor should there be an argument that access is sufficient. There's many different layers to this, and I think we got actually a sense of that from Virginie's presentation, that the way LCP approaches this, there is direct transmission of parliamentary debates and of speeches, and then programming, looking ahead to those things, analysing them, discussing them. LCP loves its discussion programmes, and a real mix. Now, there are some formats which are only one thing. So the website I showed you it gives uninterrupted coverage. A lot of BBC Parliament is uninterrupted coverage. But on its own, and without good quality political journalism, whether it's in dedicated programmes and dedicated channels, or it's part of general news coverage, which mustn't be forgotten in all of this, because that's how most people are going to get their information about Parliament. You need both. They're both good things, and there's a wide spectrum.
A good example of what is actually happening is it's going to be presented after the break by Ms. Kouluri. What we're doing is basically, from the one side we have the raw uninterrupted broadcast of the Parliament, of the plenary and the committees. On the other side we have, for example, there is a TV show, there is a show we have that Alexia is presenting, and we invite all the presenters of the political parties every time there is a law passing in the Parliament, and there is a discussion where the laws are being analysed and discussed with the journalists, so that the public can better understand why this law is passing, and all there are many things in each law. So there's basically both things happening. From the one side you have the live or taped broadcast of the committees, or the live broadcast of the plenary session. And on the other side you also have supportive talk shows that help the citizens better understand why this law is coming and voted in the Parliament.
There is another part to this.
Postoji još jedna strana ovog pitanja, pitanje novca, pošto je dosta skuplje moći imati dobar produciran program ili dokumentarac nego što je direktno prenositi samo sednicu parlamenta. Naravno, moj kanal je drugačiji od LCP, ali imamo drugačiji budžet. LCP ima fantastičan budžet kada se uporedi sa budžetom koji mi imamo u BBC-u. Mi samo imamo 1,5 miliona funte godišnje. Postoje drugi kanali koji imaju i manje novca od toga. I kad odlučujemo šta ćemo da prenosimo, moramo da uzmemo u obzir i sam budžet. Ako sam dobro razumeo, vaš kanal sa kojim delite frekvenciju, javni senat, ima sličnu vrstu budžeta. Da. Mi delimo isti kanal sa javnim senatom. Teško je za svaki kanal da prenosi sve debate. Zato smo stvorili 2007. još jedan kanal na internetu i preko ADSL-a gde imamo prenos 24 sata, gde s jedne strane imamo prenos direktno iz parlamenta, a onda imamo preko ADSL-a i preko interneta mogućnost pružanja komentara od strane javnosti, tako da postoji način da se i na taj način prate debate. Ali tačno je da LCP i javni senat moraju da donose odluku da pruže jednu mešavinu informacija, mešavinu programa, da prenose uživo sednice parlamenta i interne razgovore, ali tu postoje i određeni drugi programi, dokumentarci koji će dati pravi kontekst u kom se dešava ova sednica da bi javnost mogla bolje da razume. također postoji želja da se privuku gledaoci koji će pratiti dešavanje u parlamentu, dakle, i da im se pruži više informacija kroz dokumentarce, magazine i tako dalje. Budžet LCP-a se daje od strane države.
U trećoj sesiji gdje ćemo vidjeti kako to funkcioniše kad je RTS u pitanju, ali i Evropska komisija.
But we'll hear more in the third session. The European Parliament, Greek television, all that will hear more presentation about how they work in the second half of our presentations.
Of the European Parliament TV, and I would like to thank Mr. Knowles.
Ja sad imam pitanje za gospodina Knowlesa. Rekli ste da vaša publika je 3 muškarca, od 4, 3 muškarca su jedna žena.
They watch it during the day. My question is, have you undertaken any study or have you made any efforts to enlarge your audience? Is your target group these people, or is your target group different kind of public? Have you ever tried to see how you can target younger people, for example? That's one question. The second question is that what is the cost? I think you mentioned a number, but I didn't got it. And whether you have done a cost-benefit analysis, and this goes also for Mrs. Nicolle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, okay, so a little bit more about our audience and who's there and who's not watching. The audience figure that I will give you is we have an audience of 1.8 million viewers in an average month at the moment. And that's it's a very particular way of measuring audiences. So it's a different way of measuring online audiences from TV, from radio. The audience that's measured is only those people who are watching at home, and that's likely to be people watching in the daytime, and that's therefore likely to be that older audience. Because the way, I don't know if it's different in other countries, but in the UK there is no measurement goes on of audiences who are watching out of the home. So if you watch in the office, if you watch in the pub, anywhere, and people do watch BBC Parliament in the pub, incredibly, in 1 or 2 places, strange pubs, but they do exist, you're not measured. So I have no information, so I can't put them into the figures. That's the only measurement I've got. I actually don't think it would be all that realistic to chase a younger audience. For one thing, that audience is moving away from television very fast. What my priority is actually to get the service I've just shown you onto tablets, because that's not available mobile, that's only available on desktops, and that's increasingly a problem. So that's how I would get to the younger audience. Have we made any efforts to increase the audience? Well, not through spending any money on marketing or anything like that. There's none of that activity. What we do, I put a lot of effort into getting cross-trailing from other BBC channels, particularly from the BBC News channel. And we sit next to the BBC News channel on the digital terrestrial platform, and that's really important. It means that when people are bored with the news and wandering around up and down the spectrum, then the next channel they come to between BBC News and Sky News is BBC Parliament, and that's how we'll pick up a lot of viewers. The other thing, but there are things I can do, sound a bit passive at this point, but we have changed our schedules a lot in the last couple of years to emphasise live, because people love live on television. They really do. And although, I know many of the members of Parliament here will, with the absolute best of intentions, mean to watch this session on catch-up online, I fear that what actually happens is that it's a bit like those box sets of Hollywood, of American TV series that sit at home underneath your television set that you mean to watch, and you don't quite get round to it because there's always something else comes up first. Live is just completely different, whether it's online or it's on the television. It has an immediacy and it grabs you. So we now show quite a lot of committees live, and we've made really big changes to the schedules, and I'm far more robust than I was about changing the schedule to go to the most interesting event that's happening right now in whichever chamber, whichever parliament that we cover. We do that. So that's audiences, and you asked about budgets. Just to run through, our budget is £1.5 million, so it's a lot less than the French channels.
It's our
total,
global, global budget for the not only production, it's a global budget.
I'll come on to that. But it is a different measurement. In my 1.5 million there is no figure there for how much the transmission costs on digital terrestrial. That's a bigger number, and I don't have the number because the BBC buys that bandwidth as a block, and it's not split down, and I can't give a realistic figure, but I would, if I had to guess, it would be around £3 or £4 million that we pay for that transmission. But I don't know, and it will vary from year to year according to the market for that spectrum. So I'm sorry that's not a good answer, but it's a completely honest one. So production budget I can give you, I don't have that. And there is a third cost which is not included in my budget, which is the cost of providing subtitling for the hard of hearing. And that's a very expensive thing to do, very expensive. And it sits, thank goodness, in somebody else's budget. So it's not part of my 1.5. The other thing I should say is that there are some pretty big hidden subsidies in that 1.5, because I can take political programming and documentaries from I have access to most programmes that are made in the rest of the BBC and can show them second showing on my channel and don't have to pay for it. And that's a pretty big hidden subsidy. Plus I'm very good at borrowing things, and I borrow studios and I borrow people all over the place. So, you know, it is in a standalone operation that's not connected with a national broadcaster, you wouldn't be able to produce equivalent to BBC Parliament for 1.5 million. It would be a bigger figure.
I would like to take the opportunity from what Mr. Kasmat said in the first part of his question to address to Mr. Knowles. You said something that it's common and well known, that usually the viewers, the public that views the parliamentary channels or follows the parliamentary procedures is the public that goes, the citizens that go to vote, are the voters. In my opinion, this is a little disappointing. So I would like to make a comment. It's not exactly a question to Mr. Knowles. Of course, we cannot expect only from a parliamentary channel to make all the work that a whole institution as a parliament, that a whole public institution as a parliamentary institution has to do. I think that the parliamentary channel is a pillar of a whole structure, parliamentary structure, communication structure, that has to put under light the connection with the citizens. We don't have to accept from the beginning, when we are drafting parliamentary policy on communication, I think we don't have to accept that the only people that are aware of parliamentary work are the voters. We have to address and we have to try to approach, persuade and engage all the citizens by using all the available means. One of them, of those means, is a parliamentary channel or parliamentary broadcasting. That's what I have to say.
Ima li još pitanja?
Any other questions?
There's no other question. I would like to ask you, both of you, what about social media? Is there any part of your work or any section in your organization which deals with social media? Thank you.
I think you'll find that compared with LCP, we're probably quite backward on that. And yes, we use Twitter to disseminate information about our programs and stories we picked up. But I'm quite cautious on this. I don't want to, perhaps too cautious, I don't want to give the impression to our audience that when they're talking to us, that they are talking either to government or to Parliament, because they're not. We're just broadcasters. I think that there's a real risk for a national broadcaster like the BBC to, at times, to get in the way of the discussion that should be going on between the people who vote and the people they vote for. And it's really interesting looking at the feedback. We get lots of feedback, but a lot of it is really confused, and they're confusing us with Parliament. And when they should be talking to their MP, they're writing to us. So it may be that I'm just simply on the wrong side of history on this one. Too old for the job I'm in. I don't know. But I'm cautious about it.
Yes, on LCP, internet and social network, it's an era important for us to reach the new generation and other people. The social network, there is a person in the organization chart in charge of social network and the animation of Twitter, but it's a way for us to introduce in our program and the magazine of debates the voice of viewers on a subject, on actuality or a question. By this way, by the interactivity, we offer to the viewers the possibility to interpolate the MPs in direct during magazines. Yes, we use this social network in this way.
Thank you very much. I'm from the delegation of the European Union to Serbia. I wanted to ask to Ms. Nicolle and Mr. Knowles if you could, let's say, outline 3-4 main differences between your two channels. What would you say? I mean, we heard the budget, but beside that, if you would, just point out to 3-4 main points that are different in your channels. Thank you very much.
Sorry, that was very rude of me. I was conspiring with our chair. I'm just hoping that we might prompt a question from any of the MPs who are present for what we're doing. Perhaps, I mean, I can't force you, but it would be lovely to have a question. Okay, so the difference is, if there was one word to describe the sort of different, the ethos, and LCP has chosen trust, we'd go for a word similar. I'd go for authenticity. It's got a lot in common, but there's something about the directness of the transmission of parliamentary debates whole, and of some of the other things we do, where we'll show historical programmes like a general election night programme from 50 years ago, and we'll show it in whole without us interrupting it. So authenticity and trust are related to each other, but not exactly the same thing. There's a very big difference in terms of, I think, in terms of the proportion of our output which is dedicated to parliamentary proceedings. The majority of BBC Parliament is the live and recorded transmission of the work of Parliament in its different chambers and of committees. And the proportion of airtime that we give to documentaries and to discussion programmes is much lower. So there's a very big difference in balance between the two. And I'd love to know, when Virginie comments, actually where you get your audience from, and actually what you know about, if you know about the different, which programmes win the biggest audiences. So that's the, we're not, there is no political involvement in the channel, in how it's set up or how it's run at all at any stage. So there is no committee of Parliament that is responsible. I don't answer to MPs for my choice of committees that we filmed. And this is not an easy choice. I mean, there are about 40 select committee hearings in a normal week, of which we will film, say, 7 or 8 of them. And that's quite a highly selective editorial process. And it's my editorial judgment, and there's no question of it coming anywhere near the Parliament as to who makes that decision. So those are some key characteristics.
Yes, it's a different editorial choices, but we share the same priority to broadcast parliamentary works, and it's difficult for the director and editor to choose the different plenary room or commission or audition. But there is a selection, of course. But LCP propose in a very diversified grid to attract the audience to the channel.
I've got another thought about the differences between us. The UK is bicameral, the same as France. But one chamber is democratically elected and the other is appointed and in various different ways inherited. So there's a clear priority for the Commons over the House of Lords. So it's a discussion between me and different parties as to what I do with the schedules, but I don't have to worry about, I'm not handing over the airtime, half of the airtime to the other house and to another body. It's a single stream of output. And I made some until 2 years ago, we were showing the House of Lords as a matter of course the next day and in full. And it had dawned on me, I'd recognised that had become really a real problem in terms of scheduling the channel and attracting an audience. It meant that we couldn't ever cover committees live, and the work of the committees is becoming more and more important. It meant I couldn't go to Scotland or Northern Ireland live, and they have some pretty important debates, especially those going on at the moment in Scotland about the question of independence. So I've got real freedom of manoeuvre between these different chambers and between these different parliaments. And so at the moment I'm showing, and the audience has noticed this, I'm showing an awful lot more live from the Scottish Parliament than ever before, because that's such a big question now in the life of the UK. So I don't have to worry about that negotiation of airtime between two different entities.
Gospodin Kouanis, izvolite.
Mr. Koler, please, the floor is yours.
It's a question for both of you. Do you cooperate with other parliamentary channels, either in the production or exchange of programs? Any kind of programs. I mean, not only parliamentary, any other kind of stuff.
to a pretty limited extent. We take 3 hours of programming from C-SPAN in Washington each week, which is a hearing or a public event that's particularly prominent and that I think will mean something to the UK audience. Yeah, they give me a menu and I choose from this set menu that I get, like in a restaurant. I'll have B, thank you, this week. And a live 2-hour discussion program, which is great fun because a lot of Brits ring in to Washington to make their views known. So there's a sort of they organise it in a really interesting way. You have 3 phone lines, and one is if you're a Republican, and one to use if you're a Democrat, and the third is neither, or undeclared, or a Brit. I mean, the C-SPAN are magnificently, absolutely dedicated to impartiality. It's the hardest thing in the world to get a political conversation going with a C-SPAN journalist. They just won't do it because they do not want to risk tainting that impartiality. So that's the main co-production we do. I haven't talked about the European Parliament, and I should do. It's becoming more and more interesting in the way its debates are run and the subject, and there's a big story there in that such a significant proportion of the MEPs who were returned are anti the EU. I mean, there's a big fight going on there. It's a really interesting and important story, and Britain, as you know, is notoriously or famously, however you want to mark it, skeptic in its viewpoints. Not universally so, but if you look at the voting patterns, it's quite a hard parliament to cover, in that people don't debate in the sense of cutting across each other, intervening on each other, but tend to read speeches which are then translated, or simultaneously translated, one after another. So it's not a particularly easy watch, especially if you're used to the British House of Commons. But we have started taking some of the debates live, and I think from next month we'll do that as a matter of course from the Strasbourg sessions. So, it's becoming more and more interesting and something that's becoming a more significant part of our output.
For LCP, there is a cooperation with, for example, TV5 Monde. It's an international channel, yeah. For a European point of view, because we have got a weekly magazine on the European situation, so we cooperate with TV5 Monde, and for example, for deadlines electoral, to exchange matters of different country.
Now it's the opportunity to allow one MP to pose a question, to see how it looks from that perspective, what they are interested in.
My name is Sabina Dazdarevic, and I'm the Member of Parliament for the Sandžak Democratic Action Party. And I would like I have a question for Mr. Peter Knowles. You said that the British Parliament doesn't interfere with what the BBC Parliament channel do. So my question would be, based on what you decide, what is important, what is interesting to the audience? Is this based on your personal opinions or some statistic, or I mean, from the point of a member of parliament, which member of the parliament, what behavior is more interesting, and what behavior is less interesting? So how should the parliamenter behave in order to get in the headline of the BBC Parliament channel? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. I'll take the question in terms of select committees and the work that goes on there, I think, principally. There's what's least interesting, what's least attractive. There are some MPs who are very, very good at using procedure, using their intimate knowledge of the darkest corners of parliamentary procedure to occupy the airtime. They will bring in their own bills, they will destroy other people's bills. There's a small number of all parties, this is not a party political point, who love parliamentary procedure. It is probably the least attractive part of our schedule. So that's going negative. To be positive about it, when I'm looking for committee hearings to cover, what you're looking for above all is, I mean, there are some which are simply, how could you not cover the Defence Secretary answering really difficult questions about a mission that's in trouble, that kind of question, or the Chancellor of the Exchequer about how we're getting on with the deficit. Some things are a given. But there are other things which are simply surprising, and you think, well, I just haven't heard Parliament talking about this before, haven't heard it dealing with it. So there was a committee inquiry very recently, in fact it just reported its findings today, I think, yesterday or today, looking at underachievement of working in education of working class white children. I think it was originally titled Working Class White Boys, and then I think they changed it to children. And remarkable because it was using language which just is you're not used to seeing on the title of a committee hearing or a parliamentary debate. I mean, very directly addressing an issue that I haven't heard spoken about in such direct terms previously. And the other things that are really strikingly interesting are when you get witnesses who are directly involved in events, who've been responsible for huge decisions, whether commercial decisions or political decisions, who may well not be, who are not members of Parliament, but who are from outside the immediate world of politics, and you just haven't heard from them before. So Rupert Murdoch appearing in front of the Culture Committee was really interesting, and there are many others as well, and I get to choose which are interesting. There was a wonderful conflict of interest which is arose this week. I was due, I'm not any longer doing it actually, but I was due to give evidence to a committee tomorrow, and so there was a sort of funny question, which is I was asking myself, well, is this worth showing? And I decided, and it wasn't, so we didn't book it for filming. But normally the kind of conflicts of interest and the editorial decisions we take aren't quite so tortured as that one. So people who from outside the immediate world of Parliament who are appearing as witnesses, who you really want to hear from and you want to see their interaction with MPs. And in terms of MPs and who you want to watch on television, one last thought is it's actually those who don't, who look at the people they're addressing, who don't read a speech out but actually speak from the heart and from the intellect, and who are willing to take interventions, who are willing to be interrupted and to address the point that's actually been made to them. And I've seen in various parliaments and assemblies, all of them I suppose at one time or another, I've seen people just doggedly with their head down, reading into the record, it's called, and it's dire. It's absolutely ghastly. You don't want to see that. You couldn't watch that, could you? So they sort of head down, I've got a speech, my researcher's written it, over the page, 2 more pages to go, head down, never look at anybody, don't take an intervention. That's a killer. So we don't want that.
Since you touched on this subject, could you tell us a few things about your rules of coverage, so that we get an understanding of...
The question was about rules of coverage. The picture feed we get is determined by Parliament. It's not, we don't choose the shots. The rules of coverage have hardly changed over the years, but miraculously, wonderfully, the interpretation of those rules has changed a lot. So what tends to happen is most parliaments start with incredibly restrictive rules of coverage, which really don't let you see anything more than sort of the person who's speaking framed and almost nothing else. And some parliaments get stuck there and never move on. And there's various reasons why they do that. One of them can be, I'm afraid, that if the debates are really badly attended, and if the Parliament doesn't want to let the public know just how badly attended debates are, well, one way of doing that is never to let shots be bigger than that of the person who's speaking, so you just don't then get a sense of the chamber and who's there and who's not there. So that's changed a lot, because now you can, we have the people taking, who are filming have a wide range of shots available to them, and most importantly, they have reaction shots, cutaways, listening shots. I think we called it listening shots originally to avoid sort of frightening people that reaction shots was something sort of rather dangerous. But it's actually, it's people listening who are actively part of the debate are shown now in that, and that's changed it completely. It's now much more like watching a normal event in natural terms. Some haven't moved on. I mean, now to Washington, you'll just get the head and shoulders because there's so few people there, sadly for the most part, in their debates. And they do reading into the record in a big way. So there are some real problems. If there's disruption to the proceedings, I'm afraid the rules of coverage are enforced strictly, and you get the cameras go to a single shot of the speaker who stands up in the chair and who lays down the law, and we don't get to see what's going on around. And if a member is being thrown out, there's a formal language for that, but or if there's some kind of disruption, we normally don't get to see that.
If there is a fight?
If there's I'm trying to think if there has been a punch-up. I'm not sure there has actually. There has been certain sort of elements of bad behaviour. The most interesting for us is, I mean, the parliamentary chamber was invaded by protesters over fox hunting. You see, the things that gets the Brits really agitated, fox hunting. So some young people ran in and massively disrupted proceedings. And we were given that we saw what happened quite clearly. And I can't remember if it was that instance or another one where we were told off by the parliamentary authorities, the broadcasters that all were, for showing footage which wasn't allowed according to the rules of coverage, and we just said we wouldn't do it again until the next time, something like that.
Kolega, izvolite.
My name is Dejan Aksentijević. I am telecommunications engineer. I have heard very little about what's probably not the topic of today's discussion. What is the technical support for parliamentary broadcasts? And if all three representatives could tell us a bit more in a couple of sentences what the technical support for the broadcasters in their each individual case? Also, how do you fight for the independence when deciding what to show, seeing as BBC is financed as a public service? Because lately in Serbia we've had a lot of discussions about censorship and only censorship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On the technical side, the technical provision of the pictures is done by Parliament. It actually has changed since Andreas last had information on the Westminster Parliament. It's now out of our hands. Parliament provides it. The only thing we pay for is the coverage of the committees. So I'm afraid actually I don't know the numbers of staff employed to do that. What I can tell you is in terms of what we then do with the picture and how we transmit it is normally we have, whenever we're live, got live output, we'll have one technical operator on duty. And those technical operators are managed by a technical lead who looks ahead to what the issues are going to be and deals with problems and plans for us. But when we're not live, there's nobody there because we put our programs on servers and we trust in God, and usually it works. But the wonderful the thing about digital transmission is it's perfect apart from when it stops, and when it stops it really does stop. So we had a catastrophe last week when our router, a matrix with 64 feeds on it, 64 feeds, how on earth does that happen? And that works the whole time. And then it just chose at 2:30 in the afternoon to stop. And we had to find a spare from somewhere. So that was pretty tricky. But still, normally one person, it's a very, very slender technical operation, and there is no dedicated technical effort to the 8 live web streams. We just pull in effort when we need it and hope that it is there to be pulled in. The question about resisting pressure, I'll go back to the word I used at the start of my presentation, which is I think this is far more than it's about rules and laws, even, and media laws. It's about culture. There's simply no expectation amongst the members of Parliament that they could influence my choices. So it just sort of doesn't arise that they go around saying, I mean, they might express disappointment that their committee wasn't covered, and they might send in a complaint. It's always after the event, not before. Complaint that they weren't covered, and I deal with it. And sometimes we say, actually, it was a miss. We should have covered that. You absolutely have to be honest, and we're not perfect. I'm not proposing to anybody here that all my editorial judgments and those of my team are always right. They're not. We do things in good faith. And the choices we make about the committees, those choices are based on incredibly little information. You get a speakers list and kind of roughly what they're talking about. But the reason I'm not appearing tomorrow before the committee is when we got the real question list yesterday, discovered that none of these questions were for me, and it should have been somebody else in the BBC answering them entirely to somebody different. So you don't get much information in ahead, so that does lead to sometimes to imperfect judgments. But the MPs don't expect to be able to influence us. There's a different thing going on here between government and the general news coverage. I mean, it is a commonplace, whoever's in power, that the Prime Minister's office will be ringing up senior correspondents, BBC and other organisations, to argue for a certain line to be taken, complain why a certain line wasn't taken. That happens just all the time, that kind of pressure. What I'm talking about is something slightly different, is that in our organisational culture, there is no expectation that they could or should influence my choices of debates or hearings. And there is a sense often expressed to me of real relief that they don't have that decision, don't have that responsibility. There is so much that Parliament is responsible for that it does have to make difficult decisions over, that to be relieved of that responsibility and to have it take place somewhere else, and it means they can always blame me. They don't have to blame themselves for the choices that were made. In terms of MPs and parliamentary officials, the clerks, the senior officials, they're on the whole rather grateful that, for the most part, that they don't have these choices to make.
If I may, I'd just like to add a little something from somebody from the Public Relations Office. The censorship is never linked to the work of the Parliament as such and to our broadcasts. Our technical capacities are such at the moment that everything that happens in the Parliament is transmitted directly live and goes directly. There is no editing. We go live, and everything that takes place here can be seen on our website. So I just wanted to point out that the word censorship should be linked to the reporting from the Parliament itself. Please take the floor.
For LCP, on the point of view of technical part, it's difficult for me, but I'm going to try to explain. It's the same thing for BBC Parliament. It's the Parliament who broadcasting how the Assemblee and the Commission, but all the Commission are not broadcasting. All the room doesn't have the camera. So there is this selection, but we receive this signal to broadcast on our channel. And after, where there is interruption, we check we have got a journalist in the who can explain or yeah.
But I'd like to add something about the technical equipment. The creation of parliamentary television needs an initial investment, which is a little high. I mean, it's not a cheap hobby, parliamentary broadcasting, because you need an initial investment in equipment. Currently, cameras are high definition 2K, and you need to constantly upgrade all the machines because television broadcasting is evolving very, very fast. Now we are 2K, we already have been introduced in the market the new 4K cameras. By the end of the decade we're going to have 8K cameras, which means new editing machines. All the, apart from the plenary session, you're going to have to put cameras and to all the committee rooms and keep changing them. We managed, as a small parliament, we managed to create the Parliamentary Broadcasting TV station out of a great coincidence. In 1997, we hosted the international championship was EAF International Championship in '97. So after the international championship, some of the equipment that our public broadcaster ERT didn't need, we took them and we managed to create our TV station. So you have to be a little innovative. If you don't have all that money to do it, you may find other ways to create your own.
And another thought here, which is quite important. It's something we've touched upon, but let me be absolutely clear about it. There's a huge difference between being a standalone channel and being embedded within a large public broadcaster. The reason why I can say, well, there's only one technical operator and when we're not live, he doesn't need to be there, is because there is a big engineering infrastructure elsewhere in the BBC. So when we had our crisis last week, we could call upon a lot of engineering effort to solve what was a very big problem. So we do have that, and that big advantage being part of a very big broadcaster, which a standalone channel, whether it's run as LCPN is run, or whether it's as Bundestag TV that we might have heard from this morning, but they weren't able to be here, they have to do everything for themselves. And it makes a very big difference, and it makes a very big difference to the cost.
You may actually, well, this is not an intrusion to your, to what you're going to decide, but maybe you will find out that it would be much better to actually go through RTS instead of creating an independent TV station